Hey guys, my name is Ryan, and welcome to Overwatch Central. Today I wanted to sit down with Sideshow, who is an Overwatch League analyst. When it comes to knowing the pro players, what they like to play, what they don't, Sideshow knows an awful lot. He's been VOD reviewing all of the games of the Overwatch League so far whilst he's in the UK, waiting for his visa to sort out. But I did want to ask him about the PTR changes and the new meta that we could potentially see. Winners that will come into the meta in a big way, those that may potentially leave it, and of course what's going to happen to GOATs. There is a little bit of discussion about the Overwatch League. I know this isn't an interesting topic for everybody, but on the face of the game, there are some really good answers in here that I wanted to highlight. So much so that in the comments below, I have timestamped specific questions that I felt were worth highlighting, so if you just want to hear the answers very quickly, you can just go below, click the time, get the answer to you want, and be on your way. But this is very much a meta at the moment 101 and how that's going to change. There's a lot of really interesting stuff in here, hence why this intro is a bit longer. So I would definitely recommend listening to the whole thing. Without further ado though, let's get started. And of course you can check all the Sideshow stuff in the description below, his Twitch and his YouTube. Certainly for a more not interested in Overwatch League audience, there's generally this misconception that it's just GOATs all of the time. For the most part, it is GOATs, but roughly in percentage wise, how much is GOATs? What other stuff's been played? Are there any other comps that are quite popular from what you've seen so far?
It kind of depends on the team, actually. If you're not a fan of GOAT's compositions, then you might just want to follow a couple of teams that play totally different stuff. I mean, Chengdu Hunters basically play zero GOATs because their main tank doesn't really like to play Reinhardt or Winston. I know, strange, controversial for a main tank player, but he basically only plays Wrecking Ball. So they play a ton of weird compositions where they play Wrecking Ball and a couple of DPS, or they'll throw a Sombra in and stuff. So they're a really fun team to watch. Florida Mayhem have been trying some stuff with a lot of Mei. Twix been playing Mei on Rialto and on Kings Row as well, which has been a little interesting. But you're right, for the most part we are seeing something like, I would say about 70 to 80% GOATs on most maps. But also then it's map dependent too. On maps like Busan and sometimes on Nepal, you'll see a lot of triple DPS compositions with a Wrecking Ball, and those can be incredibly entertaining. Teams are playing like Widowmaker, Tracer, Sombra, and then a Wrecking Ball, and then playing with Anna and Lucio in the backline. So we are getting quite a bit of variation, but you are right in saying that the majority of it is GOATs.
Now, you're not a prophet, as much as you may like to believe. You can't predict the future, but we have a huge PTR patch. How much do you think the Overwatch League is going to change because of that? Do you feel that... We'll talk specifically GOATs. It's being played 70% now. Where do you sort of estimate it would be for Stage 2 when these changes go in? I think it'd be in for a Stage 2, right?
It seems... I don't have any inside information, but it does seem pretty likely that it would be in for Stage 2. Nate Nanza at the end of last season was talking about how the development team is going to try and sync up the major patches to be in line with the stages, and it seems like it would be on track at the moment, so no guarantees, but it seems likely to me that would be the case. In terms of how much stuff is going to change, I've seen some people around the scene saying that GOATs is definitely dead. Some people in the scene, particularly Nox, who is one of the coaches for British Hurricanes in EU Contenders, doesn't think it's going to change much at all. For me, I think it's probably going to be a bit of a nail in the coffin for the GOAT's composition being run so often. And there's a couple of reasons for this, in my opinion. People are kind of focusing on the Zenyatta changes, where the Orb of Discord isn't as much, because, Zen's a real pivotal person in the GOAT's comp. But you can run GOATs with Anna and stuff like that, so that isn't too much of a change. But the big ones for me is the fact that Lucio's speed boost has been reduced so much. So, imagine you're a GOATs team, and you're playing against a Sombra Pharah or a Junkrat or something like that. The way that you get around them at the moment is that you have to speed very quickly from one place where you're safe to another place where you're safe, or try and speed into the team really aggressively so that you get picks before you just get blown to pieces. And with the reduction to the speed from Lucio, the kind of passive speed has been reduced from 30% to 20%, and the amp it up speed has been reduced from 70% to 50%. So these are pretty big reductions in terms of Lucio being able to speed boost your team. They're just not going to be able to move from place to place in time. And especially with the Junkrat buff, where he's just going to get riptires all the time, I think on basically anywhere that you can set up a Junkrat to defend a choke point is going to be a very good counter. People have always thought that Junkrat's a pretty good counter, but there was just too many ways of playing around it, right? But previously, people were using Junkrat a lot.
I was going to say that Hydration made a really good point. Of all of the heroes that were really good against goats in the double sniper meta, eventually got nerfed quite sort of systemically, just slowly over time. The tanks then became a really popular sort of area, like Widowmaker, Hanzo, Junkrat, when they were all really popular, like stage 4 last year. That's when goats sort of was underlined. Brigitte was kind of in the game around then anyway, but as soon as those heroes dwindled in popularity, that's kind of where goats came from. So it would make sense that, Widowmaker's been buffed regarding information that she has available to her. Hanzo, the same thing. You got Batiste, which I'm guessing we'll talk about later on. Orisa, all of these hit. It's like the whole bunker comp was buffed, and really important factors of goats was nerfed, right? Basically, that's kind of how it feels.
Yeah, and I think, honestly, I don't think that goats is going to be dead completely, and I don't want it to be dead completely. I just think that it would be quite nice for it not to be the number one viable composition all the time. And I think teams are going to be much more reluctant to pick a goats composition on a lot of maps if they are concerned that the enemy team can just switch to Junkrat and get a million Riptires and kill them, or switch to Pharah Sombra, which could still be really powerful. And some teams in the Overwatch League are already running Pharah Sombra on a bunch of maps. Shanghai Dragons, for example, are getting a lot of value out of Sombra and Pharah because they have two of absolutely the best Sombra and Pharah players in the entire world, Ding and DM. I mean, Ding in himself is one of the best Sombras and Pharahs in the entire world, probably the best Pharah in the world, if you ask me. So I think they could really find their own niche there when these changes come through, just dominating that kind of that style.
Right. Before we get too sidetracked, you mentioned Nox been very vocal about how he thinks the GOAT isn't going to die. It had a lot to do with Moira, really, that he just felt that people were going to move away from Zenyatta GOATs and just go back to the original comp, which had a Moira in it.
Yeah.
What do you feel about that? For those that don't really know how that would work, could you sort of explain why Nox may believe? Obviously, you're not him, so you don't know specifically why he was feeling that, but it seems that you can understand it to some degree, right?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's possible that Nox is totally right. There's no way of telling. Like you said, none of us are prophets, apart from Prophet. But
himself, yeah.
Okay. But his point of view is that originally Goats was used with a Moira or an Ana. And the idea is if you're playing against kind of Pharah Sombra compositions or Junkrat or some kind of anti-Goats composition, the Moira is really useful because she can output a huge amount of healing and she has that fade ability, so she's much less likely to die to the Junkrat spam or the Pharah spam or whatever. But when you play Goats against another Goats team, the Zenyatta is better because you have the Discord Orb and you have much more poke damage on the enemy Reinhardt's shield. So it just puts more pressure on the enemy Rein compositions. But he's definitely right in that if we saw a lot more Pharah and Junkrat and anti-Goats comp, people would start running Moira a lot more. And he's concerned that that composition could still be really good. But I think crucially, the difference for me is the Lucio changes, because even with all of that healing that Moira provides, and the fact that she can't really be killed that much, just the fact that your tanks have to stay out in the open much longer is going to allow you to get off much more damage, is going to allow you to build up Riptires or Barrages or EMPs, because the pace has been reduced, so it just gives you that free time to be able to build up the big ultimates you need to be able to wipe out the Goats team. So even though it's possible that Nox is correct, I think most people are feeling that this is probably the end of the Goats comp being the best composition in the game.
In those universal areas, right, I think, Goats is still going to be useful in tank-orientated maps. Certainly on points of control at University, Control Center, where teams play triple or quad tank before anyway.
Yeah.
For those let's say Hollywood, if Goats goes away, what comes in to replace that? Is it going to be Dive? Is it going to be that sort of Orisa bunker comp? Is it going to be something new? What do you sort of expect may be the, in inverted commas, new meta, right? Because there's so many heroes that have been changed. It's kind of like a Game of Thrones of who's going to be in there, almost.
Yes, yeah. I think it's very difficult to predict what's going to happen. I think the most likely situation is that every map on defense and offense will have a different little metagame happening. So for example, on Anubis, where we see a lot of the kind of bunker comps or anti-dive compositions with the Widowmaker and the Junkrat on Anubis Point A defense. I think that'll be incredibly powerful there with the Junkrat buffs and stuff like that. But I don't think you'll really see that on every map on defense, and definitely not on the escort maps as well, where you need to be a bit more mobile. So I think teams will be swapping and changing between playing dive to counter the bunker comps, playing bunker comps to counter the goats comps, playing goats to counter the dive, maybe throwing in a bit of Sombra stuff in there as well, and maybe some triple tank, triple support that includes the Winston. So it seems likely to me that it's going to be very map dependent, and that's a good place for the game to be, in my opinion. The oppressive thing, the thing that people dislike mostly about the GOATS comp, I think, is that you can just run it everywhere. It wouldn't be too bad if you could only run it on a couple of maps, and it was really powerful on a couple of maps. Like, that's always been the case, that quad tank or triple tank's been really powerful on a bunch of maps, but the fact that you can run it everywhere, even on, like, I don't know, Gibraltar, which used to be such a dive-heavy map, I think that just rubs people up the wrong way. So it seems likely to me we'll be getting back to a meta that's a bit more map-dependent.
Obviously, that's good for the Overwatch League, right? I guess you have this example, certainly in like the UK, of like football teams having very, Arsenal being known for being very aggressive. And there's always that joke of like, can this Spanish or Brazilian player handle a cold Monday night in winter playing against Stoke, because Stoke are known to be like just big and burly. I guess that's a really good thing about the Overwatch League, is that you have teams now that are very much like, we will play GOATs all of the time, and will probably continue to do so when these changes go in. And of course you have like Chengdu, as you mentioned, so this is where I guess you have the most open meta that we may ever see. Each of the teams is going to adapt in certain ways and have their own unique flares, right? So that's really good for the league as a whole.
Yeah, for sure. I think it definitely is. Each team is probably going to have a couple of maps or a couple of compositions that they really excel at. And for a lot of the teams that were around last year that got all the experience of playing dive and playing those bunker comps and stuff like that, and also now had to learn GOATs, they've just built out their repertoire. And they have a lot of experience being able to play all of those things. Some of the new teams that have just joined, who have basically only ever played GOATs and maybe a little bit of some other stuff, like I was saying, the Wrecking Ball compositions and the quad DPS that we're occasionally seeing in the Overwatch League, they're going to have to kind of relearn or learn right from the beginning how to play some of these compositions. So it could be a bit of a catch-up game. It's always really interesting when the meta changes and the Overwatch League teams have to scramble to adapt. There's a real arms race in terms of learning the meta quickly.
There are going to be heroes that are always going to be good in the game. D.Va is a perfect example, but in terms of like the big, like what out of these patch notes may not be like massive in terms of, like you mentioned, Lucio and stuff, but really caught your eye and went, oh, this is like a wild card in there. This could make this hero a lot better, or it can make them a lot worse. What really caught your eye and went, this one change is actually kind of ridiculous, because there's so many.
There are a lot of changes, but really, I think the weird one is that a hero that hasn't been changed at all could end up being insanely powerful, and that's Sombra. I think Sombra's buffs happened at a time when she was actually quite difficult to integrate into a lot of compositions because teams were playing so many tanks, and so she's just gone under the radar for a while. But if tanks end up not being played too much and we go to, I don't know, dive or bunker comps or anything, Sombra is going to be so powerful. She already is at the moment really powerful, and then as soon as you don't have to play tanks and you can play dive and stuff, and she's got infinite stealth and her EMP builds really quickly, and you can hide behind people and hack them and then dive them and all sorts of stuff like this, she's going to be nutty. So I think quietly Sombra might be the most OP hero in the game. It's just that because of the way the meta's been at for a long time with GOATs, it's been difficult to really see how powerful she is. Apart from that, the other one is just Junkrat, because that Riptire is an ungodly powerful ultimate. I think people have kind of forgotten how ridiculous Junkrat was at early 2018, with just Jake getting 3-man tires every time he did a bit of damage to everybody. So I don't know, for the sake of everybody in the Overwatch League, I hope that Junkrat doesn't come back and it isn't able to be played on every single map as well, because those Riptires are going to cause people to have flashbacks.
Yeah, and Mercy just damage boosted him too. It's just going to feel like we're going back in time.
Yeah, it's crazy.
We've gone over quite a lot of stuff over all of this, so I guess just as a roundup, what's your sort of perspective on stuff going forward? Like, where do you feel that the meta or the game as a whole, what kind of direction do you think it's going to go in now that we have a new hero and a huge patch worth of new stuff?
I think what's most promising about this patch is that it really shows that the developers recognized the issue with goats and had a vision in their head of how to steer the meta away from it. If you look, there's kind of a theme that runs through a lot of these. It's abilities that affect the team as a whole have been reduced, and abilities that affect the heroes individually have been increased. So like speed that affects the rest of your team has been decreased, but Lucio's still wall ride exactly the same speed because they increased that. Zenyatta's discord for the team has been decreased, but Zenyatta still does the same amount of damage himself to discorded targets. So I love the way that the developers have taken it and gone, okay, we're not going to make it any worse for you guys in ranked who don't have the same amount of teamwork. If you're a Zen or a Lucio in ranked, you probably won't notice that much difference. But if you're playing at the top level, or you're playing, you know, in GM or something like that, where okay, the meta is pretty oppressive at the moment and it's very much about how you play as a team and you can't shine that much individually, well, here we go. Here's some options for nerfing it. Now, it's possible that these aren't going to be enough, but you have to try and then see where it goes, because people can't see the future. So I love these changes. I think they are very intelligent changes to try and move the game in a better direction. And I think with Batiste there as well, it's just going to be a lot of fun to watch what the best teams in the world do with it.
And that's it for this time. Thank you very much for watching. As I said, you can check out all the Sideshow stuff in the description below. Thanks for watching, take care, and I'll see you next time.